So welcome to day 3. We're going to be looking at 20th century for the maritime era. We have a few different topics we'll go through. So the 3 lectures or modules for the day are going to be shipbuilding, submarines, life-saving stations in the Coast Guard, and finally tourism and leisure on boats. So we'll start with shipbuilding and submarines, and this specifically we'll look at Portsmouth Naval Yard. Not much on the shipbuilding itself, which was mostly in the 19th century there, but the rest of it will be on the submarines that started up with the World War I. Shipbuilding has been a mainstay of work in New England. But as the forests of trees were eventually depleted by the massive wooden ships being built in the yards, and at the end of the 19th century, with the technology changes, builders really began to shape ships in iron and then steel. So a knowledge of boat construction, like what it's built of, how it's put together, this is what's used to identify and then confirm the identity of shipwrecks, seeing that exact construction. So whether it's, the wooden construction, there's these massive timbers that are on the Royal warship Vasa that was built in 1628 from the Baltic. This is going to be very different compared to going to the beach near Crane Beach and seeing small timbers of a colonial boat. So you can easily see the differences. But when the ships or the wrecks, shipwrecks are closer in size and era, they would need a real careful analysis to ensure that what is being identified is actually accurate. So the building or repairs of wooden ships continues in the United States, but it's really at a minimal level. So there's, a few old master craft shipwrights passing on their knowledge to boat builders working on, say, replica tall ships, such as the refit down at Mystic Seaport of the whale ship Charles W. Morgan, or on small boats in boat building shops like the Strawberry Bank Museum has a boat building shop now. But on the whole, boat building in the modern era is in fiberglass or steel. So let's take a look at the Portsmouth Naval Yard itself. So the Secretary of the Navy, Benjamin Stoddard, decided to build the first federal shipyard in 1800 at Portsmouth. So basically his decision was based on the fact that he wanted the yard where there was a proven workforce. There was always already a tradition of boat building there with Badger's Island and Langdon's Boatyard first and then Badger. And there was abundant access to the materials at that point. So for Nald's Island, the government paid about $5,000 in the day. That was where they started on that island. And eventually the acreage grew as more islands were acquired and connected to them. So Seavy's Island was originally 5 separate little islands. So although the yard itself is named for Portsmouth, a border dispute over the islands was settled at the Supreme Court level in the favor of Maine. So Portsmouth Naval Yard is in Kittery, Maine. At the time, in the 1800s, to protect this new shipyard, the old Fort William and Mary on the Portsmouth side at the mouth of the harbor was rebuilt and named Fort Constitution and opened in 1808. So one of the first ships built at the yard was a 74-gun ship of the line called the Washington. So in about 1838, the Franklin Ship House was built. It was one of the largest in the United States at the time. So this boathouse that you see over on the left of the slide here, in which they could build the ship, have some protection from the elements. It's 240 feet long, 130 feet wide, and measured 72 feet high. And then in 1954, that wasn't considered large enough, and they had to lengthen it in order to accommodate the building of the ship USS Franklin, from which the building has since then taken its name. So at that point, it was the largest wooden warship that they'd ever built in the yard, and it took them 10 years to complete it. Unfortunately, Although it was many years later, there's no way for us to actually take a look at the shipyard building itself. Franklin Ship House burned beyond repair in 1936. So there have been some very notable ships that have been either built or overhauled, repaired at the Portsmouth Naval Yard. So in 1855, one of the most famous, the USS Constitution, that is still floating as a museum ship in Charleston, near Boston, came in for a restoration at the Portsmouth Yard. And you can see just from the size of her once she's pulled out of the water. So below the water looks almost as big as above the water. Another one of the notable ships that was built there at Portsmouth Naval Yard was launched in 1861 was the USS Kearsarge, and built for the Civil War and captained by John Wilson. It is famous for its battle against the CSS Alabama in the Civil War. And along with the Kearsarge, the Naval Yard built several gunboats for the Union effort. So in 1866 was the year, as they were acquiring those islands after the first one, Fernald, that they got Seavies Island, the largest of the islands. And in 1900, the turn of the century then, Congress approved a 750-foot granite dry dock that you see here on the left. It's built in the former channel, so basically the water's drained out of that channel between Fernald and Seavie Islands. So the other islands that were added in, Clark's and Jamaica's, have all been attached to this island since then. So after this, so this is sort of, recapping the 19th century, we move into the mainstay of what Portsmouth Naval Yard has made since World War I, and that is submarines.